Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Homeless people do not and cannot have holidays. At least, that's how it seems to those who look at homeless people from their well-to-do lives. They don't really notice them. But is it only when they get in their way? For example, at the entrance to a supermarket or in an underpass. Most people squeamishly pass by or throw some change in their pockets to the poor souls who are sick. On holidays, they might even hand over a bill. After all, beggars don't have holidays. James had his 25th birthday party on this occasion in the wagon, which has served as the birthday boy's home for some time now. His friends gathered. The fun, however, didn't happen until just a couple of months ago. James had plenty of friends. But since his father was the chief accountant, large firms brought the office to ruin, and he quickly fled with his mistress in Guatemala. Anyway, a lot had changed since then. First of all, James ran out of money. Secondly, serious uncles in dark suits came to him and clearly explained that both the apartment and the car, as well as the country house, would have to give him for the debts. Most of his friends immediately decided that James with money and James without money. They are two different people, and it's better not to be friends with the second one. Sorry, bro. Mike patted him on the shoulder. Favorite nightclub swim partner, and the first of James's minions. But you've got to understand, there's such a thing as a social circle, a level you can't go below. If everyone starts doing with the homeless, what will normal people say about me? And my parents will immediately send me to be tested for substances, or better yet, straight to the insane asylum. And then prove that you're not crazy. You know the concept of social circle, James grumbled. And the concept of friendship. Okay, don't look for an answer. Buddy, I hear you. The domesticity in which he now lived was a gift of fate. On the outskirts of town, he met Kevin, a homeless man who had little interest in social circles or other levels. He just saw a hungry, taken kid and brought him back to his apartment for warmth. A week later, Kevin disappeared, and James never saw him again. And he began to consider the household as his rightful inheritance. And so today, March 25, he invited the two remaining buddies to his birthday party. Alex gave him $40 for his cell phone bill. Andrew brought pizza and a bottle of whiskey. It's a holiday after all, but they didn't strike up a conversation, fading out on their own as well. What about your daddy? Don't you hear from him? Nah, Andy can't. They're looking for him. With the job James found, he shrugged his shoulders. Who'd want me to be a longshoreman or a janitor? So I feel like a bum. He was aware of how ridiculous those words sounded, as if he wasn't already a real bum. But he did not explain. After all, he still had some clothes, deodorant, and even some perfume at the bottom of the bottle, and some habits from his former home life. James still brushed his teeth daily and mastered the unsophisticated science of getting into the showers where he had not yet been forgotten. These are my anchors, he explained. I'm one step away from becoming an animal. I still know how to use a toothbrush. I'm still human. Doing his dirty work. It was another step down for him. James couldn't explain it to himself, but he felt he couldn't. After all, he was a spoiled golden boy who had never thought about money before. That was what life had prepared him for after all. So what do you think you're going to do next? Like Lisa? James stood up and went to the fancy window. It was getting dark outside. The snow outside the window was as uncomfortable and disgusting as this whole strange feast. It's always that way in March. Spring snow is misplaced and unnecessary. It shouldn't be there. Lisa. He repeated his girlfriend's name. Lisa. James, get up. His father's voice unceremoniously intruded on his motor sleep, and James was glad of it. Damn it, what a dream. He muttered and staggered foot by foot into the bathroom to wash his face. Something's mumbling in there. His father called out to him. Nothing, the boy answered. Shouting over the noise of the water, I dreamed I was a bum, and you ran away to Guatemala. So, it's my birthday. What funny dreams do you have? My father sniggered. I told you not to drink coffee at night. Another time you'll listen to your father. But I'm off to work. James always considered himself a man far from mysticism and didn't believe us. Like any reasonable person, he believed that dreams were just a reflection of our fears and dreams, and sometimes just recycled events with knowledge, but not things. Signs of fate, not mysterious warnings. That's what he thought until today, when the doorbell rang and two guys in matching dark suits appeared on the doorstep. James had already realized he would be celebrating his 25th birthday in some garbage dump, if he lived at all. And that's a moot point. Hops, without surprise, he asked. The boys nodded in unison. Your father is missing, and we can't find him. The police have been looking for him all morning. Well, you know they can't report you missing, can they? But Guatemala, James guessed. But he didn't let on. Listen, friend. One of the guests patronizingly placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. I know you're all right. You know that it's not right to give up your father. But did you understand the situation? He's not the one who stole that kind of money from the firm. What are you going to do? Give up the apartment and both cars? I heard you have a cottage too. I've got that cottage. James nodded. What's your lot in life? You'll end up in the dump with the homeless. They got their own ways, brother. Don't think about it. You can't take it. And what is it to you because of your father? To waste your young life. Why don't you whisper in my ear where to find your father? And everything will stay with you. But how shall we agree? I'd be glad to laugh. Lad. My daddy's been a bone in my throat for a long time, but I got nothing to say to you. I don't know anything. He didn't let me in on his plans, you know. Otherwise I'd be with him now, not answering to you. But you'll have to give up your property. There was a look of obvious disappointment on the faces of the guests. Take it. Aren't you sorry? The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. He waved his hand in surprise as he realized that he really wasn't sorry. Fine, fine. Why not? It's interesting, of course, but he'll think about it later in the dumpster. For now, the main thing is to make those two Musselmen believe that he's telling them the truth. And get away, preferably forever. Mike looked at his friend with participation. What's over? It turns out our merry life. So that's it. James, testing, looked at him. He had begun to believe in dreams for some time now, and now he was even curious whether Mike would turn his back on him. Or was there still a real male friendship? But Mike said nothing. He shrugged his red hair with both hands and fluttered his eyes at a loss. Shit, he finally got it out of his system. It was bullshit. So what? Where do you think you're going now? I don't know. He shrugged his shoulders lightheartedly. Going homeless, I guess. If you're not here to stay, I won't call you. But you're supposed to be my friend. James smiled. Although, by your expression, I already read the answer. But for some reason, it was very important to hear it from him. Maybe so that he could understand it finally. He has no one else. Look, Mike started to say, I'm sorry for you, of course, but you have to understand me too. If we keep talking tomorrow, the whole class will start talking about how crazy Mike is. He's friends with bums. And my father, you know, he's not the last man. He's got connections, partners, reputation. He doesn't need his son to go to the asylum. They'll lock me up and be done with it. The ASYLUM, nodded James. Well, don't bother. I hear you, don't mention it, bro. Let's have a hug goodbye. But Mike pulled away politely. That's how it is, James thought, walking down the slippery, cold winter street. As long as you have money, you have lots of friends, and they all love you. But when you're poor, you're screwed. Where are your friends? There's just a few pals left, and that's it. Thanks for that. Mike found himself a new best friend. And now he's having fun with other people's money again. Turns out that Friends Forever is like in the movies. For some reason, the comparison to the movie Friendship and the one that cheated him in life really pissed him off. But he shoots the hell out of it. And then you watch and sit there, believing like a fool. The movie would have been better, really, if the creatures had made it. His huts were already visible in the distance. He remembered with gratitude the tramp Kevin, who had let him stay with him but had disappeared. Where would you be now? Kevin, I still thank you and hope you're doing well. It was interesting in the hut. There were reproductions of famous paintings on the walls, and even an old but perfectly serviceable record player and a whole pile of records. Kevin listened only to classics, And James, willy-nilly, also got involved and became acquainted with Handel, Schubert, Brahms. Some of it even began to please him. Kevin also had the complete works of Turgenev and Dostoevsky. Where did all this come from? James questioned him. But the master just grinned and moved the conversation to another topic. James picked up the weighty volume with a cursory flip through it and set it aside. Kevin had set aside a corner near the wooden bench that served as his bed for his books. "I never thought bums were such connoisseurs of the beautiful things," said the boy. "I never thought they read Dostoevsky and listened to the classics." "You'd know better than that," Kevin sniggered. The young, enigmatic owner of the hut wasn't old either. He looked no older than 50. But of course, he wasn't referring to his passport age, but rather his life experience. Was James really lacking in experience? And how could he have had any? Up to this time, Sonny had been pampered and spoiled by the amulet of life's hardships. So James lived the last 25 years of his life like a flower in a greenhouse. He had no need, no cold, did not know about his future, and was proud that he did not have to think where he could earn an extra buck. He was lucky. I guess so. "How'd you end up on the street?" Kevin asked him. Once the surprise of the question made James flinch. He was used to the fact that his new friend and patron did not like to answer questions, and never asked himself, "Princia." James muttered and suddenly realized that, in fact, he wasn't lying now. A prince in exile, it happens. Not the least bit surprised, the bum answered, and plunged back into his reading. If it hadn't been for Kevin, the prince would have been lost. Now, in the evenings in the hut, James often remembered his former owner, and even joked sadly to himself. Now he was a prince who had inherited a castle. True, small and shabby, but don't look a gift horse in the mouth, but a gift castle in the window. Although his life was strikingly different from the past, it was very quiet and almost safe. There was still no news from his father. There was no money, but on Kevin's tip, it was possible to go in the evening to a restaurant nearby. Very nice people worked there. Each time they brought out James a bag of all sorts, with clear but unusable goodies in the kitchen. At home, the boy would look inside with curiosity, and each time he found quite decent produce. He even got his own special game, getting his daily ration. On the way to his hut, the boy tried to guess what he was going to have for dinner tonight. It was kind of a surprise, but invariably a pleasant one. He wasn't living badly. Yes, in spite of having to give up a lot, he suddenly realized how much easier his life was now. For example, it didn't matter to get to the premiere of a new movie or to a concert. Also, James was no longer bothered by the thought of just opening restaurants, and nights spent in clubs seemed pointless and rather monotonous. Now he dined quietly with whatever God gave him. And then, seated on Kevin's bench, he read Turgenev and rejoiced that his inherited palace was safe from the snow and wind. All these changes in himself James noted with some amazement and perhaps with shame. Had he so quickly turned into a real hobo who was happy to have anything to eat and a place to sleep? How could it be? He who is used to brand clothes and expensive perfume, cars and fine food, lives almost on the street and eats what is given by kind-hearted people. This question has long plagued the prince in exile, and one evening he suddenly realized it was easy for him to give up his former luxury only because he himself had not earned a luxury. That was the answer. Simple, of course, but true. Except for a couple of buddies, Lisa was the only thread still linking James to the past. She was the only one who did not yet know the truth about what happened to James arrogantly in 3 Stripes, and that he was experimenting on himself, that he was interested in living without money and giving up his usual activities. The girl shrugged her shoulders and accepted the strange Zakiden of a friend. As a matter of course, she was by no means about to give up the benefits that were available to her thanks to her father's condition in the home. Lisa never looked at her boyfriend's house. "Don't you even want to see my palace?" James squinted slyly. "I'm afraid I like it too much." She guffawed. James didn't insist. After all, she didn't have to share his new life. At his 25, he was meeting Lisa without Lisa in the company of 2 buddies. "Lisa where?" asked him casually. James turned away from the window. It was snowing outside, wet and sticky and unpleasant, like any snowfall. Lisa, what could he answer? Lisa has her own life, and she is still seeing him with a beggar only because she does not know how to give him the most polite turn away. Yes, I think we'll break up, he said. What's she got to do with a man like me? She's got a lot of money and nothing to worry about in the future. Her daddy will do everything for her. She's packed for life. By the way, who's her daddy? That's what my buddy said. You keep saying that Lisa's daddy is Lisa's daddy. Who is he anyway? James shrugged, either because of the end or because of the annoyance. Yes, I've never seen him myself, he reluctantly admitted. It's all business trips. Her dad's on the road. I don't know if he's even home sometimes or what, or how Lisa's triumphant voice came from outside. And the door to the cottage opened noisily. Lisa. The girl, laughing, ran into her boyfriend's palace and hugged him by the neck. James admired her like that, and she was so radiant and cheerful. He dabbed at her hair with pleasure. They smelled like something sweet and delicious, and the snowflakes glittered on them like exotic ornaments. It looked smart and out of place in the squalid setting, like a sparkling Christmas tree in a pile of fractured junk. So this is where you live? She asked, looking around. Here is where another male voice sounded from the door. James raised his head to look at his new guest, and the greeting froze on his lips, for the household tasted perfectly hostile. In stride his old acquaintance, Kevin walked in. Meet James. This is my father, Kevin, Lisa said. She pulled the boy by the arm, forcing him to come closer to his father. You see, my darling father, he just arrived today. I talked him into bringing me here. Len, I'm sorry I didn't tell you beforehand, but I so wanted you two to meet. Daddy, she looked at her father. This is James, my young man. Nice to meet you, young man. Kevin said a discreet hello. Have we never met before? Hello. Barely said James. I don't recall, though. He still couldn't believe his eyes. Here was this powerful gentleman, well-dressed, smooth-shaven, and with a noble gray hair. That was Kevin, the same bum who'd gotten lost somewhere on the streets of this town, who'd taught him where to get free food, from whom he'd inherited this pair. So you're the one who stole my daughter's heart. Uncomplicatedly, Kevin continued the conversation, and here he looked around. Do you live here, or is this, as it's fashionable now, a punk theme party? Again, the smile is welcoming, but not suggesting that he cut the distance. This is where James lived, and somehow he got his vocal cords together and spoke in an almost normal voice. I inherited this place from a vagrant friend. He took pity on me when I was on the street. Brought me here, but he soon disappeared. I still don't know what happened to him. I don't even know if he's alive. That's an interesting story. Tilted his head. Kevin, it's just amazing. What kind of adventures don't happen? What kind of trouble people get into? Yeah, it's amazing. Well, James dear, what's all this got to do with it, Lisa? It's all in a word, it's not that important. Dad, you wanted to ask us out, didn't you? Ask us out. We're waiting. Oh, Kevin flinched, as if he just remembered the purpose of his visit. Yes, I really wanted to. Excuse me, dear James, I'd like to invite you, and of course, your friends to my restaurant. We'll celebrate your birthday there. After all, you are 25 years old. It's a midterm anniversary. Wouldn't you agree? Before James could answer, Lisa was already holding his jacket. Honey, please, she whispered. Don't say no. I so wish we could be together on this day. I, of course, guys. No one answered him. And suddenly James noticed that there were only 3 of Lisa, her father, and himself in his living quarters. Apparently, his attention was too absorbed in this incredible encounter with an old acquaintance. Only now did he notice that his buddies had discreetly left. Okay, so now he's off with Lisa and her incredible dad. Not the bum Kevin or the businessman Kevin to his restaurant. Here's the deal. I'll wait for you in the car. Carelessly threw Kevin. Get dressed, James. It's chilly outside today. Lisa stayed with James. How unusual you have it here, she said. Took the first book she saw, stood, and carefully put it with the others. Turgenev, Chekhov, classical music. I did not know that you are such a connoisseur of art. You know, when I first got here, I said the same thing word for word. You did. So the previous owner was also a lover of the classics. That's funny. What kind of day is this? Mentally, the die sagged. I always get lost and don't know how or who to answer. I like to read some classics sometimes, he said, and listen to his wife too. Let's go. Kevin's restaurant was another surprise on an already crowded day. James knew this restaurant. This was where he came every day to get his free meal. Only he didn't go to the front door, of course, but to the back room in the backyard. Kevin taught him that, the bum Kevin. And Kevin, the owner of this place, was king and god. How cozy is your place? The guy complimented politely on the decor of the place. Actually, he didn't like it here. He did not like the shade. He also disliked heavy wooden chairs, which looked more like thrones. The carved high backs, the dark colors, the wax candles on the tables, as if in the Middle Ages. James liked the modern minimalism and design of the rooms better. The owner thanked him with a polite nod. Don't be shy, James, he said in a moderately cordial manner. Everything on the menu today is on the house. I recommend starting with the warm salad. With chicken, our chef always makes it himself. Try it, you won't regret it. Just thinking about the food, and from the hands of the chef of the restaurant. The boy drooled but did not want to admit it. For some reason, he was ashamed. Though the fact that a man living almost on the street would be hungry. What could be more obvious than that? I prefer it with seafood, he muttered. Lissa looked at him reproachfully and generally stubbornly continued James. Warm salads are not my thing. Lissa jumped up. I'll make arrangements with the chef. Sit down, sweetheart, softly asked her father. You don't have to run to the kitchen yourself. We'll get our wishes through the waiter. Sit with us. I'll run after all. I don't mind insisting. I won't be long at all. James knew she probably just wanted to be away from her father and her boyfriend for a while. The silly girl only now realized that inviting her to the restaurant wasn't the best idea. Bums don't go to restaurants. Suddenly, he felt very homesick and wanting. He desperately wanted to go back to his own life, where he was his own boss, and no one would feel bad for him. And he himself would not have to apologize for himself. For nothing. He should have accepted that strange invitation. And what's on Lisa's father's mind? Why would he want to see a show of disguise? Or maybe he's just not himself. Well, James smiled politely coldly at Kevin. You weren't expecting that, were you? Yeah, I was surprised too, you know. I didn't think you were an asshole on the sidelines of life. Didn't expect it. James didn't deny it. Why would you do that? That's what I can't figure out. Or is that a hobby of yours? Walking the streets in a papper's outfit now and then. Kevin gave him a stern look in reply. Not that it's any of your business, Prince in exile, but I'll tell you. I care who my only daughter goes out with. I wanted to look at you informally to see what kind of person you are, and how capable you are of coping with the turmoil of life. And I certainly disappointed you, the guy said with conviction. Of course, think about it, we met a month ago. And you're where you were, where you stayed. And that's the shack I took you to. So it's been a month, and you're still living in God knows where you haven't found a job. Talking tricks to a girl. Men don't do that, James. At least real men don't. James looked around longingly. He was so screwed. He suddenly remembered how, in kindergarten, his teacher had told him off for losing his mittens. Yes, so long and strictly, that at first he was frightened, then felt ashamed. And then he simply lost interest in what was happening and concentrated on something of his own. Just now he kept glancing around. Would Lisa show up? Her arrival would put an end to this painfully incomprehensible conversation. Lisa didn't show, and James began to suspect that she wasn't coming. Maybe her daddy, that actor himself, asked his daughter to stay longer in the kitchen. I'm sure they arranged it beforehand. Well, that's too bad. Then he won't get to say goodbye to her in person. I'd better go home now. Kevin said, getting up a guy. Thanks for the invitation. But I don't think tonight has any chance of being a pleasant evening anyway. Would you be so kind as to tell Lisa I'm sorry and tell her I'm not worthy of her? Good day. Wait, the girl's father held him back. There's no hurry anyway. I'll pass it on. It's not hard for me. There's just one thing you might want to think about. Oh, really? What is it, if it's not a secret? I don't care if it's about the fact that you bullshitted that girl, which in itself is disgusting. And now you run away, cowardly, avoiding, without explaining anything. And that's even worse. Maybe it's time to grow up after all. James, 25, it's not like you're a kid 5 years under 30. And you still don't want to learn responsibility. My responsibility? James answered glumly, as in no responsibility. It's my own business, none of your business. You want me to get off your princess, don't you? Well, consider it done. My best wishes. The guy walked out of the restaurant and was even glad of the wet snow. And not in the cold spring wind. Anything was better than this play, where he was forced into one of the main roles involuntarily. James didn't want that. He hoped to somehow quietly explain himself to Lisa, or even just end the relationship without explanation, to stop answering phone calls to messages from her. After all, that was the easiest thing to do, and then you wouldn't have to say anything. You wouldn't have to see her get upset, maybe cry. But in any case, he didn't plan on explaining himself to her crazy father, who, far from being a pauper, liked to play the bum, as it turned out. What is this nonsense? James thought, quickening his stride. Nonsense. Nonsense and confusion. He could already see his castle of a prince in exile in the distance, and was glad that in another 100 yards he could undress, settle down on his miserable bed, a bench, and tuck into another book and read. While all the events of this idiotic evening would be in the past, or better yet, would seem like a ridiculous dream. Maybe he really was just dreaming. Lisa, sitting at the table, cried and could not stop. Why, Daddy? Why? She sobbed. Why did you do all this? Playing some bum, finding James. What was the point of all that masquerading? Couldn't you have just asked me to introduce you? Would I have turned you down? Kevin handed his daughter a handkerchief. Lisa didn't take it. And then the father himself wiped the tears from her cheeks and stroked his daughter's head. Because he sighed, if you had invited him to visit us, and when everything was all right with him, he would have been ready for the meeting and would probably have made a very different impression. Would have seemed like an ordinary guy, what a dime a dozen around. And you couldn't tell what he really was. So I got to know the real him. I knew his father was in trouble, that he ran off and left his son alone. I knew, and that's why I played that pretty boy of yours. That's why I pretended to be him. So what? Something about him that you can find out when a man doesn't know what to do himself. When his whole world collapsed. A lot of things, my daughter, a lot of things. Is it true what he didn't tell you? That he's a pauper now? That's half the trouble, isn't it? I thought maybe he wanted to get out of his predicament as soon as possible, and just didn't want to bother you. Turns out he doesn't. It's not like that at all. It turns out James is quite comfortable living in that trailer I'd brought him to and eating leftovers from the restaurant's kitchen. I even told him this way to feed himself. And what is he himself? Look at him, that James of yours. No matter what your hormones tell you, he's done nothing for himself. He didn't lift a finger to help himself. And if it wasn't for me, he'd have frozen to death under a fence somewhere by now. The girl stopped crying in surprise. What could he have done? She was confused. Well, Daddy, you said it yourself. He has nothing left. No roof over his head, no money. Even his friends are all gone. Oh, I wish I'd known about all this before. Kevin looked at his daughter with tenderness. The little one. She is, he thought, a little girl, naive. Didn't know any worries or troubles. I was younger than him when I came to town to study, he said. Couldn't get in the first time. I didn't know enough, so I got a job as a longshoreman in a store. Arranged to be allowed to live in the back room. That's how I lived for a year. I worked and studied for exams in my spare time. I also managed to send something to my parents. And I was 17. Lisa, did your boy try to find a job? At least not permanently, but just for once. It was March 8th, not so long ago. Did he give you at least one flower, but at least a card? Lisa shook her head. No, Daddy didn't. But I thought that everything will work out, will work itself out. How? Oh, Lisa. When they say it'll work out, everybody thinks it will. And that rarely happens. Daughter, and rarely. Most of the time it takes a lot of time and effort to make things happen. I wouldn't want you to choose a man like that as your husband. You be miserable with him. I want my daughter to be happy. Let's go home. Or do you still want to have dinner? No, sighed the girl. I've lost my appetite. Her father gave her a hand. Let's go then. At home you will rest, listen to good music and sleep. And in the morning, everything will not seem so scary to you. There are a lot of guys in the world. Daughter, there are a lot of decent, honest guys among them. Calm down. But Lisa kept crying on the way home and then lying in bed. They had been dating James for a year, and in all that time her young hot crush had not faded or dimmed. How could it fade if James had such a wonderful smile? If he smelled of sunshine and ocean rim even on a cold, rainy November evening? If his eyes were like an ice ball? Lisa, since high school, accustomed to the attention and adoration of guys, without hesitation, would have gone for him at least to the edge of the world. Why? Who knew? She just loved her own. James just did. And that made her father's merciless righteousness hurt her even more. There was no need to remind her that she hadn't even gotten a puppy and a card from her boyfriend on March 8. It was the same on February 14, when the whole town was drowning in red, hearty, and pink petals. And even their anniversary was safely forgotten by James. Though Lisa would have been happy if he had just suggested that she take a walk around town and remember how their love had begun. And was it love, or had James grown cold to her long ago? Kevin paced his office from corner to corner. He knew Lisa was worried, and he blamed himself for so cruelly exposing the unsightly truth about the boy to her. I wanted to open her eyes to this knucklehead. He argued with himself. I wanted her to see clearly what kind of guy he was and why it was dangerous to mess with him. But damn it, he felt so sorry for his daughter. She's young, vulnerable, and she's in her first love. Maybe I should have been gentler. If she had a mother, she'd know that I'm a rough man, that I can know about a woman's soul. So now you have to figure it out. Did I do the right thing or did I screw it up? I'm an old idiot. I stuck my nose in where it didn't belong. He looked in annoyance out of the window, but there was still wind and sticky March snow, and spring would not come. All the cold, cold snow. It makes me sick to my stomach without it. Why is it all happening all at once? There's a soft knock on the office door. Daddy, you're not busy. May I come in? Come in, Lisa, he shouted. Her daughter came in quietly and sat down on the edge of the sofa. Kevin himself almost cried at the sight of her swollen nose and reddened eyes. It was a pity about the girl. There she sat, frail, thin, lost. Tangled in her robe like a frightened child. He shouldn't have done that to her. He shouldn't have. You, forgive me. With a shaky voice, he uttered. I know I probably shouldn't have been so rude, but I just wanted you to be. I was not offended. Daddy, Lisa smiled. Just, maybe we should give him, one last chance. Maybe he'll come to his senses. There was so much desperate hope in her words, it made my father's heart ache. Lisa, maybe he will, he said. Personally, I don't believe in miracles, but maybe they do happen. James didn't sleep either. The surprises of the day, he didn't want them to. It wasn't over yet. Today he got a birthday call from some very unknown number from his father's son. He said in an alien, husky voice, How are you doing now? I let you down. How are you? James grinned. Yeah, he's a terrific father figure. Homeless. Dad, thanks for congratulating me. How was it in Guatemala? Dad was quiet. Did they find me? He said, It's dry. They want money. I have no one else to ask but you. I gave them everything. The guy's confused. The apartment, the cars, the house. I live on the street myself. I know that now. But they need about $20,000 more from me. I don't have it. I cut James off, too. Couldn't you at least warn me or take me with you? I'm a bum. Dad, no, I don't have any money, so borrow it from someone. Dad resented that. Or I don't know, do something. Are you my son or what? Do something. The father hung up the phone in a sulk, and James sat staring at his phone screen for a long time. Do something. I wonder what he could do. The boy sat like that for a few more minutes and then dialed Lisa's number. Bunny affectionately, he said, I'm sorry things got so ugly today. I am sorry to you. Tell me, could you arrange for me to meet Kevin? It's very important that I talk to him." The next day, Kevin, barely able to contain his anger, listened to the boy's confused explanations. And the end and apotheosis of all the nonsense he contributed was a stunning one. "Give me some money, Kevin, please. My dad needs it." "That's amazing." Coldly, the man said, "That's the nerve. You've got a lot of nerve, Daddy. Cheeky. You know about that. I know. I know that very well, and yet you came to me for help. So if you think for some reason I should help your real estate developer, Daddy, may I ask where you got that idea?" "I don't," James said grimly. "But I have no one else to turn to. His father has big, even very big problems. And if you refuse to help, I don't know what will happen to him. I just don't know. Your father," noticed Kevin, "didn't take you with him and didn't even warn you about leaving. He left you alone to deal blindly with all the problems he himself created. He put you on the street. And now, when he needed money, he suddenly remembered that he had a son. And yet you still want to help him? Does it turn out that way?" "It does," the man said thoughtfully. "It does." "All right, I'll help him. But I have a condition." James felt his temples prickle. "Well, of course, the terms of the arrangement, the deal just doesn't happen." "What kind?" A strain on his voice? He asked. Kevin laughed. "Don't be nervous. I won't ask you to do anything. Just don't hurt Lisa. She loves you." "I have no idea why, but she loves you." "Well, I don't want her to suffer. She's a sensitive girl and she's very fragile. Do you have any idea how much disappointment in love can seriously tarnish her? It can even kill her. If you want me to help your father, remember, you can't hurt my daughter." James frantically bowed, and he had no idea what the strange man was talking about. What was the nonsense? Suddenly it hit him. Lisa was probably very sick. She must have a weak heart, and that was why she should not be nervous. Shit. The boy thought angrily that his father was the cause of all the trouble in his life. He was just about to break up with Lisa. And it wasn't even because now he was just a homeless man, and she was the daughter of a rich restaurateur. It was just that their paths had long since diverged. Lisa was no longer interesting to him. And if he hadn't dragged it out so long with their separation, Daddy. Not only did he leave his son without a house and money, but he also imposed this girl on him in addition. And there's no good way out of it now. "Kevin," he promised. "Lisa will be all right. Don't worry about her. Married life is not much of a paradise to anyone. First of all, because it is not a paradise, but a constant toil. A man gets used to everything very quickly. Over time, beauty, passion, and endless caresses become boring. Calmly perceived, and so once the desired separate home, and the possibility of henceforth and forever to be together and never depart. Everything becomes familiar. Here Lisa, looking at their wedding photo, suddenly thought about the fact that it looks vulgar and awfully absurd on the wall in the living room. As if 50 years ago, when hung on the wall, here's a family portrait, and then the grandchildren still admired him. It's silly. She went over to the wall and took down the poster of her family's happiness. Somehow that made her feel better. Deep down, Lisa knew it wasn't the portrait. Of course, it wasn't the portrait at all. It was simply a fake. She and James had never had a happy marriage, and so the picture annoyed her. In 5 years, James had grown a potbelly and partially bald, but he'd never lost his adolescent aplomb. He was sure he could charm any girl, and those resentments at Lisa's were okay with that. How were they to know that the car James drove, his credit cards, the apartment downtown had all been paid for by his wife? His father objected to this marriage. Take your time, Lisa," he persuaded. "Your James is not the only attractive guy on this planet. But wait, you've got another year. 6 months, and before you know it, you'll like someone else. You're only 20. What's your hurry?" And she's got snotty girls. It seemed like Daddy was talking nonsense at the time. How is it that he's so smart? He doesn't realize that she's not just 20. And it won't be long now. And she'll go from a blooming girl to an old woman that no sane man would want to look at. And most importantly, James, he's a man. And they have different requirements, as you know. They are spared by nature. And their clocks, though ticking, are slower than those of women. What if he falls in love with another girl? There will be someone younger, funnier, prettier, sillier, in the end someone who will agree to everything at once, without looking at the fact that the groom has no money, no parents ready to help a young family, no housing, no job. They'll take him away, they'll take him away. And will she sit and cry and remember her love? No, that's not going to happen. Thinking back on her childish judgments, Lisa grinned loudly and thought that she could be sure of that. It was hard to find a stupider person than her. And James had been so different to her after that failed birthday party, so attentive and caring without ceasing, assuring her of his love, and always repeating how incredibly lucky he was to have such a beautiful, intelligent, and kind girl. Within a week, they began to live together at Lisa's, and within a month they were married. The father seemed to accept the choice of his daughter, and only just before the wedding advised to think more daughter. I am not against that you created a family. That's what I want for you. But you're James. Believe me, he's the wrong man. He has no purpose in life. Lived in his father's care, didn't live, ended up on the street, didn't work hard either. Then he moved in with us. What's changed? He's going to get married. What's to support a family? He thought about that. After all, he hasn't worked until now. He's got nothing. He's counting on me to keep you from starving to death. And then she didn't listen to her father's words, which she regretted many times afterwards. She didn't even offer him a prenuptial agreement. Then she was ashamed. But now, rejoice. Even a divorce won't be painless. We have to share everything. And she already knew James wasn't going to let her down. James, on the other hand, was doing just fine. Lisa was already running one of her father's restaurants. Her trembling husband didn't have to worry about money, but he still didn't want to study or work. One day, in a burst of candor, he confessed to his wife, Lisa, if there is anything I learned from homeless life, it is that there is no point in working at all. And there is always a piece of bread. And a man doesn't need more than that. You can learn to make a hell of a lot of money, but in a moment it might turn out that all your money has gone up in smoke. And then you're a bum. So why bother then? But we're not living on the street, she said. Daddy gave us this apartment, and I work in a restaurant and bring money into our house. And you like to live not in a dump, but in a 5-room apartment, don't you? I don't argue, and eating quality food. I like it that way, and wear nice clothes. Driving my own car, not walking everywhere. And I won't deny that, James smiled. But if tomorrow all of these things were suddenly gone, I'd easily forget about them. I'm not attached to this material crap. I'm unlike you, sweetheart. If it's all there, why should I give up my comfort? But if you don't, there's nothing to worry about either. When you talk like that, you get a temper tantrum. Your wife doesn't start a family, she doesn't get married. Maybe you don't need the money or the inconvenience. All right, so be it, but I'm your wife, and I don't understand why I have to work alone and support the two of us. Say you don't like money. That's a lie. You just don't like making it. That's different. But you do like the free money. But listen to what I have to say. I'm not going to work for 2 more people so you can keep loafing around. So don't work. Smirked James. I don't care about the money. Honey, you're right about that. And it doesn't matter where I live. All that matters to me is you. It's having you around, Nothing else matters. These words used to make Lisa's heart melt. And again, she was ready to forgive her husband his principled idleness. And again, she hoped that one day he would pick up his mind. Once in a while. True, James would find something to do, but he rarely held out for more than 2 weeks. But now it was serious. 5 years of idle chatter had gotten to her. James, either you get a job, any job, or we break up, she said to her husband. James looked reproachfully at his wife, a shabby, balding man with a fat face and figure, but still convinced that his one affectionate word was enough to get anything out of his wife. We have discussed this many times. He said wearily, I see no point in participating in these cockroach races. And I'm adamant, the wife replied. I don't see the point in feeding you. Get a job, James. Or let's break up right now, shall we? What do you expect me to do? You know what? I haven't got a degree or an experience. Will my dad find something for you, Kevin? Not a chance. You want to enslave me for good. Yeah, so I can spend the rest of my life kneeling on your dad's shoulders when he picks me up. He already did. Lisa smiled and handed her husband a business card with a phone number. Call or divorce? She looked at him with some hope. If he wouldn't take it, if he refused, what then? She had already learned enough about her husband's character to know for sure she would not be able to avoid division of property in a divorce. And that would be a real shame. Lisa had not the slightest desire to share with her husband what he had not earned or even tried to earn. Damn it, but why? Why didn't she listen to her father 5 years ago? What was stopping her from just thinking about it for even a small, brief moment? A known hormonal flurry under the dubious name of first love. And yet she even wished James would have just stonewalled now, said he wasn't going to call anywhere, and he wasn't going to work either. But he took the phone with a sigh and squinted incredulously at the card. Did your father give you this? That's right. But James didn't believe her. His wife rarely looked to her father for help, and since she was earning her own money, you could tell that her relationship with Kevin had become exclusively familial. Words like money, work, necessity disappeared from them completely. On the contrary, Lisa even tried to help her father, who was quite capable. He did not need money, of course, but her daughter often gave him gifts. Kevin, who was obsessed with technical innovations, helped with the other restaurants whenever possible, giving her father a break. James grumbled that it made Lisa work long hours, but he didn't dare to object openly. Perhaps the duties of a manager imprinted on the character of his wife's once soft, not able to object. The girl suddenly showed a surprising hardness in her character. James feared that if he dared to contradict her in the matter of helping his father, he would pounce on her in the form of a kick. And then he would have nothing else to do but head for the street. Now James sat in another job interview and looked at his potential boss with a playful smile. Perhaps she couldn't be called beautiful, but still good-looking. She was about 30 years old, no more than dark hair, with huge blue eyes, and most importantly with a narrow waist and a high, lush chest. The only pity is that this person prefers pantsuits. It would be nice to have a look at her legs as well. But James had no doubts, and her legs were fine. She moved very easily. She must have been a dancer, and she moved effortlessly from one pretty pose to the next. That one could watch it endlessly. Here she was just sitting with her fist under her chin, but here she tilted her dainty head lower. And she was writing so fast, so beautifully, the line just flew along the paper, and the letters all looked like graceful beads one by one. He imagined her at home, coming out of the shower, wrapped in towels with wet, shredded hair on her shoulders. Not yet dried water droplets. Miranda, what? He interjected. He was so curious and dreamy that he listened to her question, "Why haven't you worked anywhere before?" Patiently she repeated, "After all, you are 30 years old, usually at that age. But I'm not an ordinary man." He smiled at Miranda. Miranda raised her eyebrows in surprise. "I had no need to work," James simply explained. "My wife is decently well off, and since she's gravely ill, I've had to devote a lot of time to her." "Oh, I understand," the girl nodded. "So your wife is an invalid, and you—" "She has a very weak heart," interrupted James. "My father-in-law had mentioned it to me before the wedding, and he was more in hints than in words. I felt it my duty to devote myself to the welfare of my wife. And she has no objection to you." "You what?" James waved his hands. "It was at her insistence that I did. You see, she wanted me to have something to do, to take my mind off, you know." Yes, of course. I'm sorry to ask such personal questions, but you have to understand that circumstances like this can have a profound effect on the quality of your work. That's why I have to." James stopped her imperiously, raising his hand. "Don't apologize, please. I know perfectly well what you mean. It's all right. My wife will have a wonderful nurse. I found her through people I know. They say she's just magic." Miranda nodded, and James knew instantly that he had succeeded in convincing her. Now he went to the office 5 times a week to retype texts. Lisa was happy, even though her husband brought home almost nothing. She was glad that he was finally doing something. She didn't hold out much hope that this new occupation would be of any use to him. But at least now he wasn't boring her with constant complaints about how little attention he was getting from his wife. And of course, James didn't know that right after he left, the beautiful Miranda, as he was beginning to call her to himself, picked up the phone and called Kevin. "Honestly," she said, "I don't think this son-in-law of yours is very interested in the job. The resume is practically non-existent. I don't know what he's done before. Not a lot of work skills, I'm afraid. Yes." And then he said his wife's health required the closest attention. "What?" he asked the man in astonishment. "The wife's health requires close attention." But Miranda hesitated. He said that she has. "I mean, your daughter has a very weak heart. So I see." "Miranda, I see, thank you. So you're not taking him to work." "Well, why wouldn't I? But with a trial period. Don't be sorry, you know what? That he's a lazy thug." "I understand, my dear. I also understand that we'll have dinner together tonight." The girl smiled, and her voice immediately and businesslike became soft caressing. "I will." Kevin, her flirting with this intelligent, imposing man, and flowed old-fashioned slowly. However, that's what she liked. Kevin had been taking her out to dinner and to the theater for the second week in a row, to a new play. And invariably he walked her home and ceremonially kissed her hand goodbye. Miranda was delighted with this manner of courting. No hurry, interesting conversation and exquisite compliments, and most importantly no haste, which often corrupted her younger suitors. Kevin himself had time to confess to himself. He is head over heels in love with this sophisticated girl, afraid to push her away with unnecessary ardor. Slowly but surely, step by step, he worked his way to... The only one who knew about Kevin's budding affair was his daughter Lisa. "You're not judging me?" Embarrassed, he asked. "Don't you think I'm an old fool who thinks he's a wolf for a young girl?" "Stop it, Papa." The girl laughed. "You are a fine man. Any woman could only dream of such a man. And it's high time you thought about yourself. All you do is work. I'm that all life is. Don't you deserve to be happy?" I admitted it. "I'm thinking about proposing to myself. Not right away, of course, but later. We'll have to get to know each other first, and I'd like to introduce her to you. Mary, Papa, Mary." Lisa hugged her father and kissed him tenderly on the cheek. "You certainly need a wife, a kind, clever one. I'll have more fun if I know for sure that my daddy is happy." But only she giggled. "Don't insist that I call your Miranda Mom." And Kevin laughed, and now Miranda told him about some interesting information. It turns out that lousy James chattered that supposedly his wife had a weak heart. He quickly dialed his son-in-law's number. James briefly said he was having the conversation. "You could come up to my house in half an hour." But Kevin, in a disgruntled voice, answered his son-in-law. "I still have a lot to do. I'm sorry. Can't we talk on the phone?" "You have nothing to do and never have," the man answered calmly. "How could I have anything to do? Don't judge. This is not a telephone conversation." But James had already disconnected. It was very much in his style. Without listening to the end of the conversation. "The longer he lives with my daughter Evil," Kevin thought, "the more cocky the bastard gets." What did Lisa see in him? Apparently, the serious conversation with my son-in-law would have to be postponed for the time being. And James drove home in a lovely, dreamy, and thoughtful mood. He had been working at Miranda for a month, and for the first time in his life, he was enjoying his work. Not the dreary retyping of texts per se, of course. Is there a more boring occupation in the world? But he saw Miranda's elusive gracefulness every day. She comes to work, the way she leans closer to the monitor, the way she talks on the phone with her shoulder pressed against the receiver. She also folded her tinted eyebrows so nicely. If something surprised her, she would adjust the chain on her thin neck, wipe her glasses, and squint funny. I wondered if she had anyone who thought of James, and inevitably blurted out another typo in the text. Carefully, James shook his head at Miranda, noticing his slip-up, and he winced with happiness that his beautiful boss had addressed to him and deliberately tried to misspell it once more. Coming home, James hardly noticed his wife and spent whole evenings watching Miranda's profile in social networks. Recently, after getting a moment alone with her, James suggested that we have coffee together sometime. But the girl only laughed good-naturedly. "I'm sorry, James, but I must refuse you." I have a fiancé. But I'm not suggesting that you should cheat on your fiancé, said he in a gust of noble indignation. That's out of the question. After all, I am not a free man either, and I am not going to cheat on my wife. That's commendable, approved Miranda. But James went on with his fiery speech. I meant an ordinary coffee break, perhaps a walk in the park, a little chit-chat, and that's all. Do you see anything wrong with that? No, the boss replied with a smile. Nothing at all. But still, I would prefer to confine myself to business relations only. And in the evening, he received his settlement, realizing that he was not going to get it. James lost interest in his job in the blink of an eye. After thinking for about half an hour, he realized that he was ready and wrote his letter of resignation. His boss did not try to persuade him to stay. James, feeling free and almost happy before he went home, nevertheless took the much-desired walk in the autumn park with a cup of coffee in his hands. True, he was alone, and then he was on his way home, thinking how nice it would be to be free again. Then the boss would certainly not be able to resist, no matter who her mysterious fiancé was. He'd probably be a match for her if it weren't for his marriage, and not the fact that he is James Mann, essentially a beggar and homeless. Alas, the option is free and rich, implied only one way of going about things, and that is widowhood to a young and wealthy widower. How romantic does that sound? Catching himself at this thought, James shuddered and thought hastily that he did not, of course, wish his wife dead. He merely thought that being a wealthy widower would be very, very nice. But suddenly he realized no, he had been lying to himself for quite a long time. Maybe he didn't want to die, but he was clearly waiting for it. That conversation 5 years ago, when his father-in-law had warned him of Lisa's fragility, had not gone out of his mind all this time. James decided then that his father-in-law was alluding to the girl's fragile health, possible heart problems, and subconsciously he was used to thinking that his marriage to Lisa had a time limit. And that time limit was not long. Sooner or later he would get his freedom back, and with it a sizable chunk of his wife's inheritance. But one thing was certain in the 5 years of their married life, Lisa had never once caught even the common flu, let alone a heart complaint. It seemed that 5 years ago James had simply misinterpreted what his father-in-law had said, and put into his head something that wasn't there. So he was a fool. So he is. But he didn't want to think about it, for obvious reasons. The door to the apartment was unlocked. He wondered if Lisa had given up all her urgent work to spend the evening at home, though he suddenly vaguely remembered it. It seemed that his wife had said something about doing repairs. Maybe she'd come in early to meet with the designer or the workman. Yeah, the last thing he wanted to see at home right now was a one-man crew. Voices of joy and loudness came from the bedroom. Good evening. Loudly James said hello, and immediately Lisa looked out of the bedroom. She smiled and beckoned him in with her hand, inviting him in. Come in, James, we have guests tonight. I should have warned him, he muttered. I'm actually home from work. I want to rest, sorry. My wife whispered. You're right, of course, but all this was a complete surprise to me. Hello, son, and James was numb. He couldn't quite believe his eyes. It just couldn't be. It was a nightmare dream. But he had to believe it, because right now his own father, round and burnt in the tropical sun, was rushing down the hallway to him, opening his arms. Daddy, it's you. Aren't you glad to see me? The father shouted joyfully and held his struggling son tightly to him. How glad I am, my son, that you are so cleverly settled in life, though I never doubted you. Yes, Lisa has already shown me your apartment. What can I say? I'm very pleased with it. You did so well. You married so well. Honestly, I was a little afraid you'd pick up some kind of a frosty out-of-towner. You know how it is, don't you? Another time love hits you on the brain, but you managed to surprise me. James's display of enthusiasm made him uncomfortable. I wondered if his father was going to tell him something like, "And now, my dears, I want to make you happy. I have come for good and am now going to live with you. How long will you be in these parts?" he asked me cautiously. "Or are you just passing through?" Father sighed and scratched the back of his head. "I am afraid, my son, that I would like to stay for a long time, but I cannot. I have 2 wagons of business and 5 carts, each stopped. James couldn't help smiling, but at least not forever. That's fine too. I'm still a father, you know? I'm a family man now. Yeah, I'll tell you all about it. Anyway, it's been a long time since I've seen you, and you'd like to talk about a lot of things. But actually, I thought you weren't married. And I wanted to ask you to come with me. Help my dad with the store, babysit my brothers. And then we could find a bride for you. Listen, my wife has a little sister who's growing up as a bridegroom, and she's beautiful. You've never seen anything like her. You don't see them on TV or in any magazine. I thought I'd come. I'll tell you all about it. We'll go to Guatemala together. For some reason, my son clarified, although he already knew the answer. Well, of course there. My father nodded with joy. You should see James, how beautiful it is. And meet my family. Look, I've got one just as young, thin as a stem. But everything that is supposed to be in place, and modestly affectionate, obedient. If I had known there were such wives in the world, I would have left long ago. She's already given me 2 children. James, you've got 2 brothers growing up, and we're expecting twins in 3 months. What kid you got there in Guatemala? Oh yeah, sure, they're beautiful. They all grow up to look like their mother. My father was so happy he was jumping up and down. I thought your daddy wasn't good for anything anymore. Come on, guys like me, on the contrary, are in high demand. A man in his prime, he's seen a lot of things. For such a man, it's not scary to give a young girl. The absurdity of what James heard made his head spin. So that's how it is. While he was homeless, dear. Then he married a woman he didn't love and didn't know where to get out of the marriage. His daddy, who had started it all, was getting on with his personal life and even had some new kids. Except that, son, his father went on as if nothing had happened. I'm home. Well, I opened a store in Guatemala, but it's not a small family. You have to feed them all. In general, I started with used cars. You just repaint it to match the car and you can sell it. Congratulations, James grumbled. So we don't need the money. You might even want to do something for me. Take your time. The thing is, I was doing okay at first, and then, well, I went broke. A little bit of a tax cheat. It used to work, but then there was this one guy there who was principled. So I'm going at him this way and that way. He doesn't take bribes. He just sits there, the bastard. That's why you don't lie that you missed him, right? Well, my father lowered his eyes. Yes, that's why. Well, who else should I turn to? Only to a grown-up son. My wife's relatives are simple people who live in a distant village. What kind of help can I ask them for? And me? What am I to you? A bank card? They fired me from my job today, for example. Stop it. My father winked. You were homeless when I first approached you, and you dug up 20. And now I need even less. Oh, come on. Yes, now I ended up owing $15,000, but 5 for taxes, to be exact. The rest to expand my business. Without that money, I can't go up. And I got a wife and almost 4 kids. In a word, you couldn't, but help me out one more time. No, James shouted. His rage was shaking the blood in his temples for pounding. So he had time to be frightened. I don't want to have a heart attack. Listen, Father, do me one single but huge favor. Get out of my life. And don't show up with your begging anymore. Get out. What are you babbling on about, son? Father said get out. Wait, James. His wife stopped him. You don't have to swear. I could give you money. Don't, Lisa. Abruptly, her husband cut her off. Don't you see? He's a swindler. He's the one who got to me. No, James, you. You listen to me first. Please, listen to me. Aya. Lisa took a deep breath and spoke quickly, as if in a hurry to say everything she was thinking. James, I'm ready to give you the $15,000 so you can go away with your father. Isn't that what you want? I know it's a different life. And anyway, Lisa? No, don't interrupt. I know how much you miss your freedom. But in exchange, can you promise me that you won't divide our property in court? You'll just take the money and leave, or you'll stay and still have no claim to anything. What did my father's head spin, moving his gaze from Lisa to James and back again? You what? You don't want to live with my boy? Shut up, Dad. No, you look at her. Dad wouldn't let up. You've seen yourself in the mirror. A pale, rotten mouth. Daddy, shut up. You don't tell me what to do. I thought my son married a normal girl. So you can think about yourself in your old age. And look who you took as a wife, such a husband grabbed and wants to divorce him. Lisa laughed. James suddenly thought it had been a long time since he had seen her laugh so sincerely. And she was laughing. So flushed all over, held her stomach, and slowly slid down the wall. You're going to fall. He picked her up by the elbow and brought her back to an upright position. She's a raving lunatic too, my father said sadly. Congratulations, son, you've made an excellent choice. Lisa waved her hands at herself, trying to catch her breath. Take the money. James, start a new life, she said at last. But honestly, how much longer are we going to be on each other's nerves? By the way, said the husband with a frown, if we divide the estate, it would be worth a lot of money. Well, as long as the trial takes place judiciously, said Lisa. Well, my lawyer will chew out the best terms for me. And don't expect to get away with it. And your father needs the money now. Isn't that what I understand? She looked at her father-in-law questioningly, and he nodded affirmatively. Well, you can get the money you need right now. You have no conscience, James grumbled. No, she laughed again. But what was the deal? Done immediately, the father-in-law interjected. Deal, girl. Look, James. He put his arm around his son's shoulders. Let's get the money, and then we'll get the tickets and take the next plane. My passport's expired, James thought. I'll just have to get it fixed. My dad didn't get confused, but that's no problem. I'll leave you the address and the money for the ticket. When you're done here, come straight to me. Okay? Don't worry, I'll talk to my wife. We'll get you such a bride. You don't regret anything, do you? Kevin asked, squeezing his daughter's palm in his hands. Yes, as Lisa had grown up. He had feared that the divorce from James would be a crushing blow to her. She's okay, she's laughing. If there's one thing I regret, Dad, it's that I didn't listen to you when you told me to stay away from him. But I've made up for that mistake now. Better late than never. Really, now enough about that. It's your wedding day, I remember. Miranda is amazingly thin and beautiful. In her snow-white dress, she smiled softly at her husband. You talk, she said, and lightly touched Lisa's shoulder. You haven't had time to talk in all the hustle and bustle of the wedding. She went away to the guests. Lisa looked at her in admiration. How sweet is she, your Miranda, she said. So beautiful and considerate and kind. Any other bride would have been angry that the bridegroom was busy with his daughter at the wedding. She just knows, her father winked at her, that right after the party we'll leave for our honeymoon, and we'll have plenty of time for each other. By the way, Miranda told me that her half-brother is coming to visit her very soon. He says, extremely decent man, a restaurateur, just like me. And by the way, he's already madly in love with you. Lisa was confused. He's never met me. I don't even know him. But Miranda showed him your picture. My father smiled. Of course, it's too early to talk about serious feelings. But why don't you meet him? We could walk along the waterfront, ride the Ferris wheel, eat ice cream. And it might take your mind off the bad memories. Meanwhile, James was walking through the streets of Guatemala. What can you do? The climate here is merciless, almost like Siberia. Only in Siberia, the cold never ends. It's a terrible scorcher here. James poured a bottle of drinking water on his head and felt better for a few minutes. For the past hour, he had been going around all the houses at the address his father had left him. And everywhere the answers were the same. No Ben, no 4 of his children, and certainly no used car store had ever been heard of. All that was left to do was to admit the obvious was a bastard. Daddy had conned him again. And for some reason, James wasn't the least bit offended. After all, he had known for a long time that his father could not be trusted, even if he looked straight into your soul with his honest blue eyes. He was lying, the bastard. He knows how to do that. But this time the son was going to surprise his father. And so he went straight to the embassy, where within half an hour he got all the necessary information. Ben had once lived in Guatemala, but had emigrated to Mexico City with his family. Well, that's wonderful, James thought gloatingly. Wait for me, Daddy's bus to Mexico City is running smoothly here. Ben didn't sleep well that night. Whether it was the heat or the moon shining particularly brightly tonight, the dreams were disturbing. As he slept, Ben lay on the couch watching the news, but all of a sudden the news broke, and the screen showed concentrated tapes of his face. Couldn't you sleep? My son Ben asked from the screen, and he couldn't understand how James knew about his insomnia. It must have been the Echelon tape. Someone wanted to make a joke, but James did not disappear from the screen. It's all daytime news. Daddy said to him, you shouldn't watch them. So often the nervous system gets overwhelmed by the daytime news. Yes, it's also not a clear conscience. Isn't it shameful to do that to your own child? What did I ever do to you? I couldn't stand Ben, you're a grown man. What did I do to offend you so much that you climbed into the TV? But I will. The on-screen son answered nonchalantly, and we'll talk for real. If you want to know, I'm not far away, open the door. At the same second, the doorbell rang, and Ben flinched and glanced at the screen. James was smiling dazzlingly. I told you I'd open the door. I won't open it, for Ben muttered. Maria shouted, hoping his wife in the kitchen would hear him. Maria, look who's here. But his wife didn't answer. Open the door, Papa. James raised his voice. You should not keep your son on the doorstep. What about you? Ben shouted, trying to find the remote control beside him. You're just messing with me. You don't know where I am, son. You think I'm in Guatemala, don't you? Don't you? Surprised son. Did you look out the window? Ben moved his gaze to the open window with his heart. Outside it was exactly the same as in the yard of his little house. Maria shouted Ben in despair at the incessant trill of the faithful bell. Maria, Maria, where are you? What is it to you? His wife's tired voice floated into his sleep. Ben cried out and opened his eyes. Maria was sitting on the bed, rubbing her eyes with her hands. I could have chosen a calmer life, she said, getting up. But for some reason I got involved with you. Even at this early hour, no one lets me sleep. You scream in your sleep, or the doorbell rings. I'm coming, I'm coming. Already called early in the morning, she shouted. Ben only now realized that someone was really ringing the doorbell, and apparently it had been ringing for a long time. Wait, he whispered hoarsely and grabbed his wife. You're out of your mind, she sighed. Ben clutched his head. More than anything, he wanted to crawl under the bed and lie there for the rest of his life, so that no one would ever find him there. But from the door, your son has come to see us. At last we can meet him. Meet your son quickly. Ben took his sweaty hands away from his face and realized that dreams can sometimes be true. Right in front of him stood a slimmer and more handsome James. Where did you come from? With a faint voice, he asked. I am. Yes, yes, Dad, I know everything. Really? Nodded James. You got the wrong address. And when I found out, I knew you were going crazy with worry. I wanted to calm you down quickly, so I went to the embassy. And here I am. Maria looked at father and son with infinite sympathy. What a blessing to have everything cleared up, darling. She hugged her husband in an impulse. Now I understand why you've been having nightmares. But why? Why didn't you tell me? My third cousin lives in Guatemala. She would have met your son and explained everything to him. Then just didn't think about it. I was so worried that something would happen to my son. The man's hands spluttered Maria. Do you always think you're smarter than everyone else in the world and get tortured? Instead of asking her wife for advice, she turned to James. I'm going into the kitchen to see what I can feed you. I bet you're starving from the road, and your father can show you where the bathroom is. Honey, she looked sternly at her husband. Come on up, can't you see that? The boy is tired and covered with road dust. He needs a good wash, and she disappeared into the kitchen, and soon her cheerful and melodious singing came from there. Maria was clearly delighted to see James arrive. It means a lot to them to be related. Ben smiled faintly. I can see that, James nodded. You have a very hospitable wife. And Ben coughed. You'll be with us long. And then James finally did what he'd sought out the embassy for, hustling in a bus in the unbearable heat. And then spent the next hour at the police station telling everyone that he wasn't on drugs, but that he was just sick from the heat and fatigue. He grinned and, looking triumphantly at his father, triumphantly announced, "You know, Dad, I like it here so much. I think I'm going to stay here forever. I hope you don't mind." The father threw up his hands and finally hugged his son. "Forgive me, my boy. It's all my fault. I didn't take the time to raise you, left you to your own devices. But you found me anyway, and you don't hold a grudge. Listen, son, you wouldn't happen to have an extra $5,000, would you? $10,000 is fine. There's a project coming up. I'll tell you about it. You could put money into this project in installments. How else do you talk to Lisa and her dad?" "No, it's okay. We'll figure something out. Where have we been? We'll show everyone. They'll talk about us." "Don't worry, son. Your father is still doing just fine." Ben kept talking and talking, and James looked at his father and smiled. And yet he was very close to him, even if he was a little crazy, and even a little crazy father and son together. And that is the most important thing. And they will not disappear in this world. They will find money, they will start a business, they will get rich. But all that will be later, a year from now, maybe even 2 years from now. For now, James was just smiling and insanely happy to meet his own father.